The encounter at the twin suns of Orvac 3 burned low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood red. The alien marketplace was alive with sound traders shouting, machines humming, strange animals crying out from their cages. Jack Turner, a human far from home, moved through the narrow streets, his eyes scanning for the supply dealer he'd been told about. Everywhere he looked, tall alien structures leaned over him, their glassy walls reflecting the flickering light. The air smelled of spice, metal, and something sharp he couldn't name. Humans were rare here, and he felt the stares on his back. Most were curious, some wary, and a few hostile. He kept walking, pretending not to notice. Jack had learned early that looking nervous in alien territory was like bleeding in front of a predator. You never wanted to look like prey. As he turned a corner, the noise of the crowd suddenly dropped. It was like the entire street inhaled and forgot to exhale. In the center of the road stood a woman. No, not a woman exactly. She was at least a head taller than him, her skin a deep bronze that seemed to catch the light and hold it. Her long hair shimmered like black metal, braided with gold wires. But what drew his eyes most was the long scaled tail curling behind her like a living whip. Her golden eyes locked onto him. They didn't blink, they didn't soften, they just burned. She took a slow step forward, the crowd parting for her like water. When she spoke, her voice was low and sharp, in a language he didn't understand, but he didn't need to. Her tone said enough. She was angry, and her anger was aimed straight at him. Jack stopped. He didn't know who she was or what he had done to deserve the glare. Maybe she hated humans. Maybe he'd stepped somewhere sacred without knowing. Whatever it was, the air between them grew heavier. People whispered from the sidelines, their eyes wide. Some even backed away, as if expecting violence. The alien woman tilted her head slightly, her tail twitching. Jack noticed that every time the tail moved, the crowd reacted. Some leaned back, others flinched. It was clear the tail meant something here, some kind of warning. And for some reason, Jack's curiosity outweighed his caution. He stepped closer, just a single pace. The woman's eyes narrowed, her fingers flexed like claws. Jack's pulse quickened, but instead of backing down, he did something reckless, something stupid, something no sane human would even think of. Doing without breaking eye contact, he reached out, his hand brushed against the smooth, scaled surface of her tail. Then, in one quick motion, he pulled it. The marketplace fell silent, not quieter, silent. Even the caged animals stopped making noise. The alien woman froze completely, her head snapping around toward him. Her pupils contracted into narrow slits for a heartbeat. Jack thought she might actually tear him apart right there in the street, but then something strange happened. Her breathing changed, growing slower, deeper. The fury in her eyes didn't fade, but it shifted. It was no longer the wild rage of a predator about to strike. It was something else, something sharper, more focused. The crowd started murmuring again, but this time their voices carried confusion and disbelief. Jack didn't understand the words, but he caught the tone. This wasn't just an insult, it was something more. The woman stepped closer until she was only inches from him. Jack could feel the faint heat radiating off her skin. She looked down at him, not just because she was taller, but because in every way that mattered. She was a predator, and he was the intruder. Her voice, when it came, was softer than before. You, human, do you understand what you've done? Jack swallowed. His instincts screamed at him to lie, to pretend he knew, but something told him honesty might be the better choice. No, he said simply. Her eyes widened slightly. Then, to Jack's surprise, the corner of her mouth curved upward, not in warmth, but in a slow, dangerous smile. It was the kind of smile a hunter gave when the prey had done something interesting. You will, she said, her tail curling behind her again. Then she turned her back on him and began to walk away. But after a few steps, she stopped and glanced over her shoulder. "Follow," she ordered. Jack stood there for a moment, the weight of 100 alien eyes on him. Every instinct told him to turn around and leave. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the sense that he'd just stepped into something far bigger than himself, kept his feet moving. He followed her into the winding streets, deeper into the city's heart. The crowd parted for her again, and wherever they went, the whispers followed. Jack had no idea what he'd just done. But he knew one thing for sure. Life had just gotten a lot more dangerous. The sudden change. Jack followed her through the crowded streets, unsure if he was walking toward an answer or a trap. The alien woman moved with the kind of grace that came from years of training. Every step smooth, every turn precise. Her long tail swayed behind her, almost brushing the ground, and every time it moved, nearby aliens stepped aside. It was like watching the wind part tall grass, except here the grass was made of towering, armed creatures that didn't dare block her path. They entered a quieter part of the market where the buildings were taller and the shadows longer. Strange banners hung from the walls, painted with symbols Jack couldn't read. Some of the colors were bright and fresh, but others were faded and torn. It felt like this was an older part of the city, a place where outsiders rarely came. Jack noticed fewer vendors here, but the ones who were present watched him with cold, unblinking eyes. Finally, she stopped in front of a heavy metal door. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She simply placed her palm against a scanner. The door hissed and slid open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with a low, humming sound. She stepped inside and gestured for him to follow. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud, and Jack instantly felt like he'd been sealed inside a cage. The room was circular, with a table in the center and strange weapons displayed along the walls. The air was warm, and a faint scent of smoke hung in it. She turned to face him, her golden eyes studying every inch of his face. Jack stayed silent, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was steady, but carried a weight he couldn't ignore. "My name is Lyra Vey," she said slowly, as if making sure he would. "Remember it? I am of the Drakari clans, and you have done something no outsider has dared in centuries." Jack frowned. "I pulled your tail," he said. It sounded ridiculous when he put it into words, but Lyra didn't laugh. "In my culture," she said, taking a slow step toward him, "the tail is not just part of the body, it is part of the soul. To touch it is to claim, and to pull it is to bind." She paused, letting the words sink in. Jack tried to process that. "You're saying I just claimed you?" he asked. Her smile was sharp and humorless. "You have challenged me, human," she corrected. "And by our law, I must answer, either by taking you as a mate, or by killing you." Jack blinked. There was no laughter in her voice, no sign she was joking. His heart thumped harder in his chest. "And which are you planning to do?" he asked. Carefully, her eyes gleamed in the low light. "That," she said, "depends on whether you survive what comes next." She turned and walked toward the table, placing a long, curved blade upon it. It was black, edged with silver markings that seemed to shift like liquid. "This is not a matter of choice," she said without looking at him. "You have triggered. The old law and the council will demand a trial, a test to prove if you are worthy." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "What if I just leave?" he asked. Lyra looked at him over her shoulder, and for the first time there was something like amusement in her eyes. "You could try," she said, "but the city would hunt you before you reached the outer gates." Jack exhaled. Slowly, "All right," he muttered. "Tell me about this trial." Lyra walked back to him, her tail swaying behind her in slow, deliberate arcs. "There will be 3, she said, "and the first will be in the arena tonight. You will face a beast bred only for killing. You will fight it alone." Jack shook his head. "I'm not a gladiator," he said. "I'm a trader. I don't fight monsters for fun." Her expression hardened. "Then you will." "Die," she said simply, "and your death will tell the Drakari that you were never worthy of touching me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Jack felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. It wasn't just about survival. There was something else here, something deeper. He could see it in her eyes. The way she was watching him, like she was waiting for him to make a choice. Finally, he straightened his back. "Fine," he said. "I'll fight your beast, but after that, you tell me exactly why you didn't just kill me in the street." Lyra's lips curved slightly. "Again, agreed," she said. "But first." She stepped closer, so close he could see the faint pattern of scales along her jawline. Her tail curled around behind him, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the air shift. "Understand this, human," she said softly, "from the moment you pulled my tail, your life stopped being your own." Then she stepped back, turned toward the door, and pressed the panel. "Come," she ordered. The door slid open, and beyond it, the faint roar of a distant crowd echoed through the streets. Jack hesitated. For only a second before following her out, he had no idea what kind of beast he was about to face. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever had just awakened inside Lyra, it wasn't going back to sleep anytime soon. The hidden lava streets leading to the arena were carved from dark stone, worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, casting pale light that made the shadows seem even deeper. Jack walked beside Lyra, still trying to understand the weight of what she had told him. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but never one where a simple act pulling someone's tail could lead to life or death. The faint sound of the crowd grew louder with every step. It wasn't the excited cheer of a sports event. It was darker, heavier, like the audience wasn't there for entertainment, but for judgment. Jack could feel eyes on him from hidden balconies above. Every glance carried curiosity, and maybe a little bit of hunger. Lyra kept her gaze forward, but her tail occasionally flicked, as if she was aware of every whisper around them. Finally, they reached a side entrance guarded by two massive Drakari warriors, their armor black and gold. The guards bowed their heads to Lyra, but their eyes locked on Jack. One of them spoke in their harsh native tongue, and Lyra replied with a short, sharp sentence. The guard's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside, allowing them to pass. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the faint smell of blood. They moved through a narrow tunnel, the stone walls damp and cold. The roar of the crowd was a constant hum above them. Jack noticed iron gates ahead, behind which shadows moved heavy shapes. Pacing slowly, Lyra stopped and turned to him. "What you need to understand," she began, her voice calm but edged with something serious, "is that the Drakari do not make laws lightly." She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "The tail is sacred. It is more than a limb. It carries the heat of the heart and the memory of the ancestors." Jack frowned slightly, trying to follow. "You're saying it's like a symbol of your soul?" Lyra nodded once. "To pull it is to reach for the very center of who we are." She said, "In our oldest traditions, there are only two reasons someone would dare to challenge for dominance, or to claim a bond that cannot be broken." Jack let out a slow breath. "And because I didn't know, I still have to face the consequences." Her tail gave a small, almost restless twitch. "Yes," she said. "Ignorance does not erase the law." He leaned back against the cold wall, his mind spinning. "So if I survive this trial, what happens?" Lyra's gaze didn't waver. "If you live, the council will accept you as my equal, bound to me in the eyes of our people," she said. "If you die, the law will call me the victor, and your death will close the matter." Jack studied her face, looking for any sign she wanted him dead. But what he saw instead was something he couldn't quite name. Maybe respect, maybe curiosity, maybe something older. "Why didn't you just kill me in the street?" he asked quietly. Lyra's jaw tightened because, human. "The moment you pulled my tail, I felt something I have not felt in years," she said. She didn't explain further. Before Jack could ask, she turned and started walking again. They reached a small chamber with stone benches along the sides. A Drakari elder was waiting. His skin faded to pale bronze. His eyes milky but sharp with intelligence. He wore a cloak of black fur, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command. "This is the outsider?" the elder asked. Lyra nodded. The elder studied Jack for a long moment, then spoke again, his tone slow and deliberate. "You have broken the boundary of the tale," he said. "And so the law of binding calls for trial." Jack resisted the urge to explain it was an accident. Somehow he knew it wouldn't matter. The elder gestured toward the far gate. "Enter the arena. Face the beast. If you live, the law will be satisfied for now." Lyra stepped closer to Jack, her voice dropping low so only he could hear. "The beast they choose is meant to kill quickly," she said. "But if you survive more than 100 heartbeats, the crowd will begin to shift in your favor." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And you? Which way are you hoping it goes?" Her tail brushed lightly against his arm. A small, almost unnoticeable contact. "Surprise me," she said simply. The sound of the crowd swelled as the inner gate began to rise. Light from the arena poured into the tunnel, blinding him for a moment. Jack stepped forward, the heat hitting his skin like a wave. When his eyes adjusted, he saw the sand-covered floor. And at the far end, a shadow emerging from another gate. It moved low, its body coiled like a spring. 4 glowing eyes fixed on him. The crowd began to chant, their voices deep and rhythmic. The beast stepped fully into the light. A massive creature with 6 clawed legs, armored plates along its spine, and a mouth filled with curved, bone-white fangs. It let out a roar that made the walls tremble somewhere behind him. Lyra's voice carried across the arena. "Remember, human. 100 heartbeats." Jack tightened his grip on the short spear they'd given him. He had no armor, no shield, and no backup. Just the knowledge that if he failed, his story would end in the blood-soaked sand. The beast began to circle, its movements slow but powerful. And in that moment, Jack understood something important. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving to every eye watching that a human could stand in the Drakari's sacred trials. And live asterisk. The first trial, the heat of the arena was like standing inside a furnace. The twin suns above poured light down on the sand, turning every grain into a tiny spark. Jack tightened his grip on the short spear, feeling the rough wood dig into his palms. Across from him, the beast's glowing eyes locked onto his chest. It crouched low, muscles shifting under its dark, armor-like hide. Each slow step it took left deep prints in the sand. The crowd was silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then the roar began, deep, rhythmic, like the beating of a giant drum. They were chanting in the Drakari tongue. Jack didn't know the words, but the tone was clear. They wanted blood. Lyra stood near the edge of the arena, her arms crossed, her golden eyes never left him. Jack wondered if she was hoping he'd live, or just curious to see how he'd die. The beast's head lowered. It let out a deep rumble that made the sand vibrate under Jack's boots. Then it lunged. Jack dove to the side, the beast's claws slicing through the air where he had just been. The sand exploded around him as he rolled and came up on one knee. The spear felt light in his hand, too light to do any real damage to something this big. But he didn't have time to think. The beast was already turning, its tail sweeping across the ground like a club. Jack jumped back, the tail missing him by inches. He could feel the rush of air as it passed. The crowd roared, some laughing, some shouting. Jack realized they were enjoying the chase. The beast charged again. This time faster. Jack tried to sidestep, but one of its claws caught his arm, slicing through the fabric and burning his skin. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. Pain was dangerous here. It could slow him down. And slowing down meant death. He circled, keeping his eyes on the beast. It was powerful. But not mindless. Its movements were deliberate. It was testing him, looking for weakness. Jack knew he had to do the same. He noticed the plates along its back, thick and shiny, but near the neck, the armor seemed thinner. The skin softer, if he could get there. Maybe he had a chance. The beast lunged again. But this time, Jack didn't dodge completely. He stepped in just close enough to stab. The spear tip scraped along the side of its neck, not deep enough to wound, but enough to make it roar in anger. The crowd shouted louder. Jack could hear his own breathing, quick and heavy. The heat was making sweat run into his eyes. Stinging them, he blinked it away, forcing himself to focus. The beast circled, faster now. It was no longer patient. It wanted to end this. It came at him low, mouth open, rows of curved teeth ready to tear him apart. Jack dropped to the ground. Sliding under its belly as the jaws snapped shut above him, he jabbed upward with the spear, feeling it pierce softer flesh between the armored plates. The beast roared in pain and twisted violently. Jack was thrown across the sand. The spear still in his hands, but his arms shaking from the impact. The crowd's chanting shifted. It wasn't just blood they wanted now. They were watching closely. Some even leaned forward, their voices rising in surprise. Jack realized Lyra had been right. If he could survive long enough, the crowd would start to turn. The beast stalked toward him, blood dripping from the wound he'd made. It wasn't deep enough to kill, but it was enough to make the creature cautious. Jack forced himself to stand, legs trembling. He tightened his grip on the spear and waited. The beast charged again. This time, Jack didn't move until the last second. He stepped aside and drove the spear into the base of its neck. The weapon sank deeper than before. The beast screamed and thrashed, throwing up sand in a blinding storm. Jack was knocked back, coughing. The spear ripped from his hands. He scrambled to his feet just in time to see the beast stumble. It wasn't dead, but it was slowing. The wound at its neck dripped dark blood onto the sand. The crowd roared. Not for the beast, but for him. Jack stood there, chest heaving. His entire body ached, but he could still move. The beast took one last step toward him, then collapsed with a heavy thud. The arena fell silent for a heartbeat. And then the noise exploded. They were chanting something new now. Jack didn't know the words, but the tone was clear. They were calling for his survival. From the edge of the arena, Lyra stepped forward, her expression unreadable. The guards approached, dragging the beast's massive body toward the gates. Jack met her gaze, expecting some kind of praise. Instead, she simply said, "One trial down. 2 more to go." Jack almost laughed at the absurdity of it. His legs felt like lead, his arm burned, and his throat was raw. But something in her voice, that steady, unshaken tone, lit a spark inside him. He wasn't just surviving this for himself anymore, he was surviving it for the look in her eyes. The one that said she didn't expect him to quit as the crowd's cheers echoed in his ears. Jack followed Lyra toward the exit. The second trial was waiting, and he knew it would be worse. The unexpected rescue. The tunnel leading away from the arena felt colder than before. Jack's footsteps echoed against the stone walls as the roar of the crowd faded behind him. His arm throbbed where the beast's claw had cut him, and the muscles in his legs screamed with every step, but he kept moving, partly out of stubbornness, partly because Lyra hadn't slowed down. She walked ahead of him, her tail swaying in slow arcs. He'd learned enough to know that the movement wasn't random. It was a silent signal to anyone watching that she was in control. Jack wondered if she was proud he'd survived. If she was, she wasn't showing it. They passed through a heavy door into a smaller chamber lit by glowing stones set into the walls. Here, two Drakari healers waited, tall, slender, with long fingers tipped in silver claws. One of them stepped forward, examining the cut on Jack's arm before they could start. Lyra raised her hand. "No healing," she said. In their language, the healers looked surprised but obeyed. Stepping back, Jack frowned. "Why?" he asked. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes calm. "The next trial will not wait for your wounds to close," she said. "You must carry them with you so the council sees your strength." He almost argued, but stopped himself. She was playing a game here, and he didn't know the rules yet. He'd already survived one trial by trusting his instincts. Maybe this time he'd have to trust hers before he could think more about it. The ground beneath them trembled. A deep, booming roar echoed through the chamber, nothing like the beast he'd just faced. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound, her tail stiffening. "That's not supposed to happen," she said under her breath. Suddenly, a guard burst through the door, shouting in Drakari. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she listened. Then she turned to Jack, her expression sharp. "They've released the next beast too soon," she said. "It's loose in the tunnels." Jack blinked. "Loose? As in, down here?" Before she could answer, another roar shook the walls, this time much closer. The healers scrambled to the far corner. Fear etched on their faces. Lyra drew the curved blade from her hip and looked at Jack. "Stay behind me," she said. Jack found himself grabbing a discarded spear from the wall. "Not a chance," he replied. Her eyes flickered with something, maybe approval, before she turned toward the door. The tunnel beyond was darker now, the light stones flickering as if something was draining the energy from them. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and something metallic blood. They moved slowly, the only sound their footsteps, and the distant scrape of claws on stone. Then it appeared. The creature was smaller than the arena beast, but faster, its body low to the ground. Covered in black scales that seemed to absorb the light, its eyes glowed faint blue, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of thin, needle-like teeth. It hissed, the sound sharp enough to make the hair on Jack's arms stand up. It lunged without warning, moving so fast it was just a blur. Jack barely had time to bring the spear up before it slammed into him. The force sent him back against the wall, the air knocked from his lungs. The spearhead scraped along its armored hide without piercing. Before it could bite, Lyra was there. Her blade flashed, striking across the creature's face. It hissed again, leaping back. But she didn't give it time to recover. She pressed forward, her movements sharp and precise. Jack struggled to get to his feet. He wasn't about to stand there while she fought alone. The creature darted to the side, trying to circle them. Jack cut it off, forcing it toward the narrow part of the tunnel. Lyra caught the move instantly and drove it forward, trapping it. It struck again, its teeth snapping inches from her arm. Jack drove his spear into its side, aiming for the gap between the scales. This time, the point sank in. The creature screeched, thrashing violently. Lyra took the opening and drove her blade deep into its neck. The sound it made was unlike anything Jack had heard, a mix of rage and pain that faded into silence. It collapsed, its body twitching once before going still. Jack leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Lyra stood over the body, her chest rising and falling slowly. She looked at him, her golden eyes steady. "You would have died if I wasn't here," she said simply. He smirked weakly. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I wasn't planning on letting you fight alone for the first time." Her expression softened. Just a little. You are reckless human, she said. But perhaps. Not without value. She stepped past him, her tail brushing lightly. Against his leg, not the sharp, warning flick from before, but something different. It was almost deliberate. They continued down the tunnel. The sounds of the arena now far behind them. Jack realized that something had changed. The way she looked at him wasn't just the gaze of a warrior protecting someone bound by law. It was the look of someone who had seen him choose to fight when he could have run. And deep down, Jack couldn't help but feel that this binding she spoke of might mean more than he thought. The second trial, the mountains loomed over the Drakari city like jagged black teeth. Snow clung to their highest peaks, while their lower slopes were shrouded in thick silver mist. Jack stood at the base of one of these mountains, his breath visible. In the cold air, beside him, Lyra tightened the strap of her leather armor. Her golden eyes scanning the path ahead. This time, there would be no arena walls, no gates to separate hunter and hunted. The council had decreed the second trial. The hunt of the sky serpent. It was older than the city itself, a tradition where warrior pairs were bound together by a chain. They had to track and kill the serpent before it killed them. And the chain meant they lived or died as one. A Drakar elder stepped forward, holding the chain-blacked metal links that looked both heavy and unbreakable. Without a word, he locked one end around Lyra's wrist, the other around Jack's. The chain was short enough that they had to stay within a few steps of each other. Jack tugged at it experimentally. No give. If she moved, he moved, whether he liked it or not. Lyra glanced at him. Stay light on your feet. She said, if you stumble, you drag me down, and that will be the last mistake you make. Jack gave her a crooked smile. Guess we'll find out how well we dance. He said. She didn't smile back, but her tail flicked in a way that wasn't quite annoyance. The hunt began at the strike of a great bronze gong. They moved quickly into the mist. The ground beneath them a mix of wet stone and brittle roots. Every sound was amplified in the silence, the crunch of their boots, the faint rattle of the chain. Somewhere above, a hawk-like cry echoed through the air. Lyra's grip on her weapon tightened. That's it, she said softly. It's close. The sky serpent was said to have wings as wide as a ship's sail and scales that reflected the sky like glass. It struck from above, silent, until the last second. Jack kept scanning the ridges above them. The mist made it impossible to see far, but every shadow felt like it might move. They climbed higher, the path narrowing. Once, the chain caught on a jagged rock, pulling them both up short. Lyra shot him a glare. Watch your step, she hissed. Jack bit back a retort. Now wasn't the time. A sudden rush of air swept past them. Jack's head jerked up just in time to see a blur of silver and blue pass overhead. The serpent's wings cut through the mist, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. It's testing us, Lyra said, her voice low, waiting for a mistake. They moved again, faster now. The sound came again, this time followed by a shadow dropping from above. Jack barely had time to shout before the serpent struck. Its body was long and sinuous, its head ending in a narrow, sharp beak. It slammed into the ground between them, snapping its wings wide. The wind from the movement nearly knocked Jack off his feet. Lyra yanked the chain, pulling him back to his balance. The serpent lunged, beak stabbing forward. Jack blocked with his spear, the impact jarring his arms. Lyra darted to the side, slashing at its wing joint. The serpent hissed, twisting away before she could land a killing blow. The fight became a blur of movement, Jack and Lyra moving together whether they wanted to or not. When he stepped forward, she followed. When she lunged, he had to keep up. They began to find a rhythm, her speed balancing his strength, his reach protecting her flanks. The serpent struck again, its body coiling around a boulder to use it as leverage. Lyra shouted something in her language, and Jack instinctively ducked. Her blade flashed over his head. Cutting across the serpent's neck, it reared back, screeching. And Jack drove his spear into its exposed underbelly. The serpent thrashed wildly, the chain pulling them dangerously. Close to its flailing wings, a gust of wind from one wing sent them tumbling sideways. They landed hard on the rocky ground. But neither let go of their weapons. Lyra pulled herself up, her tail whipping behind her. Now? She barked. Jack charged with her, both of them striking at the same time, her blade cutting deep into its throat while his spear drove upward under its jaw. The serpent gave one final, shuddering cry before collapsing, its body curling in two. The mist, for a long moment, the only sound was their breathing. Then Lyra yanked the spear free and wiped her blade clean on the serpent's wing. She looked at him, and this time, there was no cold judgment in her gaze. "You fight better when your life is tied to mine," she said, almost like a tease. Jack smirked. "Maybe I just like knowing you can't run away." The elder's voice carried from somewhere in the mist, announcing their victory. The chain was removed, the weight leaving Jack's wrist feeling strangely empty. As they began the walk back down the mountain, Lyra's tail brushed against him again, slow, deliberate. Jack couldn't tell if it was a warning, a promise, or both. One thing was certain, with 2 trials down and 1 to go, the bond between them was no longer just a rule of law. Something else was growing in the space between the chain links, and neither of them could ignore it. The awakening the marketplace where it all began was quieter now. The chaos of the trials had given way to a strange stillness. Vendors spoke in low voices, and the usual shouting over prices seemed almost absent. Every eye turned toward Jack and Lyra as they walked side by side. They weren't looking at him like an outsider anymore. They were looking at him like a man who had faced the Diaries trials and lived. Jack still felt the weight of exhaustion in every step. The cut on his arm burned, the muscles in his legs ached, but none of it mattered. The second trial in the mountains had done more than test his strength. It had forced him and Lyra to move as one. Now, even without the chain, he could feel a strange connection to her, like he could read her intentions before she spoke. They reached the wide stone platform at the center of the marketplace. It was here, on this very street, that he had first pulled her tail without knowing what it meant. The memory almost made him laugh. Almost. Now he understood just how close to death he'd been that day. The Diaries Council waited on the platform. The elder from before stood at the center, his fur cloak brushing against the stone. When he spoke, his voice carried across the crowd. "Jack Turner of Earth, you have faced 2 trials and survived." The elder said, "The law demands the third, the binding decision." Jack stepped forward. "What's that?" he asked, though he already had an uneasy guess. Lyra moved to stand beside him, her tail swaying slowly behind her. The elder's eyes shifted between them. "In our law, when the one who pulls the tail survives, the bond is sealed," he said. "But there must be choice. The claimant must accept the bond, and the challenged must allow it." Jack glanced at Lyra. "So, say yes or no, and you do the same." She tilted her head slightly. "Yes," she said. "But understand. Human, a yes means you belong to me, as I belong to you. And if I say no?" he asked. Her golden eyes hardened. "Then the law is broken, and the only way to close it is with blood." The crowd fell silent, waiting. Jack took a slow breath. He thought about the first trial, the beast's claws tearing the air around him. He thought about the serpent and the mountains, the chain pulling them together as they fought, and he thought about the tunnels. When she had saved him without hesitation, they had started as strangers, bound by accident, but somewhere between. The danger and the trust, the bond, had become real. He looked at her and gave a small smile. "I pulled your tail once," he said. "Might as well see where it leads." The corners of her mouth curved slightly. not the dangerous smile from before. "But something warmer, I accept," she said, her voice steady. The elder raised his hand. "It is done," he declared. The crowd erupted in a deep, rhythmic chant, not for the trials this time, but for the bond. Drums began to beat in the distance, joined by the low sound of horns. Jack felt the tension in his chest ease for the first time since all this began. Lyra stepped closer, so close that he could feel the faint heat of her skin. Her tail brushed lightly against his leg. But this time it didn't carry threat or warning. It was something else entirely, a gesture he was beginning to understand. "When you pulled my tail that day," she said softly, so only he could. "Here, I wanted to kill you." Jack chuckled under his breath. "Good to know I made a great first impression," he replied. Her gaze didn't waver. "But you awakened something in me," she said. "For years, I fought only because it was my duty. But fighting beside you reminded me why I became a warrior, not for law, but for choice." Jack met her eyes. "And now you're stuck with me," he said. She smiled. "Perhaps," she replied, "or perhaps you are stuck with me." They stepped down from the platform together, the crowd parting to let them pass. Jack noticed that no one looked at him with suspicion anymore. Some even nodded in greeting. The trials had marked him in their eyes. But more importantly, they had marked him in hers as they reached the edge of the marketplace. Lyra stopped. She turned to face him, her voice low but certain. "There will be more challenges," she said. "Others will test you and us." Jack shrugged. "Good," he said, "because I'm not here to win. I'm here to stay." Her tail curled slightly, a sign he now understood as approval. They began walking again, side by side, and though Jack knew the galaxy was still full of danger, for the first time since arriving on Orvac 3, he felt like he wasn't facing it alone.